everyone, and welcome to the Nordic Football Podcast. My name is Jonathan Faduba, and I'm joined by my colleague Steve Wiss, my co-host. Steve, how are you?
All right, John. Not too bad, mate. Ticking along fairly nicely, to be honest with you. Enjoying the summer so far, and here's another podcast for us to talk about a lot of things.
Yep, there is indeed, and we're gonna go straight into it this week. We've got a few things to talk about. The transfer windows are open now in Sweden and Norway, so we've got some deals to be done. And as well as that, we've had a really interesting European round, haven't we, Steve, which we'll talk about. And we're also going to dip into the latest goings-on in Sweden and Norway. This week, we're going to start with Norway. And Steve, first place to really begin, I think, is European football. And I'm going to kick it all off with the Haugesund. An incredible result, seeing off Sturm Graz. I think that has to be the biggest story of the week, really, doesn't it?
It really does. And I mentioned on last week's podcast that a lot of professional gamblers were betting against Haugesund in the first leg. Well, they were doing exactly the same in the second leg. Sturm Graz were an absolute banker to win, not just to win, but to win by more than 1 goal margin. And it was 2-0 after 50 minutes, and it didn't look very good for Haugesund, but they came back really well. Got a goal from someone called Krygard, who's a new young player who's kind of emerged at the club. And they got the away goal, and I think as soon as that happened, it kind of knocked the stuffing out of the Austrian outfits. And they've got a fantastic reward. They've got PSV in the next round. Probably going to get knocked out, but what a fantastic tie for a club like Haugesund. And they've had a great period. They actually played really well in the league as well on Sunday. I don't know how the bloody hell they're managing it, John. Their squad is thin, threadbare, down to its bare bones with injuries and stuff like that, but they just keep knocking them out. Fantastic achievement. Yeah,
really, truly superb result, has to be said. A few other results to touch on. In Norwegian terms, obviously Molde won 3-1 at Kukurici. That was an interesting game as well, wasn't it, Steve? And I think there was a few others as well, wasn't there? From a Swedish point of view, BK Häcken against AZ is one I want to talk about quickly. Which other results caught your eye? Liepāja won, Norrköping won 1-0 at Liepāja to qualify. Malmo 3-2 against Domzali to win that one, 5-4 in aggregate. At one point they were losing, in fact. But a couple other teams have come through as well. We mentioned Haugesund there. And
I think,
isn't it, for some of the teams?
Obviously the ones that stood out to me was the AIK result, because if they had gone through, we'd have had our dream clash, Rosenborg against AIK, and we probably would have been doing a massive preview for this on Sunday night or something. Instead, we get Maribor against Rosenborg. So I was absolutely gutted that AIK bollocks that one up with about 3 minutes to go in extra time. But by and large, it was a fairly good week for Scandinavian teams. It's only Norway and Sweden anyway. AIK are still in Europe, at least from their point of view. It was always going to be a big test for Häcken, wasn't it, against AZ Alkmaar? But there's still quite a few teams left in Europe, and I've had a quick look at the draws today, and from what I have seen from the Norwegian point of view, it's certainly fairly kind. So there's every chance that these teams might be, from Rosenborg and Molde might be representing Norway in the group stages.
Most definitely.
Now, you wanted to talk about the Häcken against AZ game. What did you make of it? Well,
in the end, AZ Alkmaar outclassed Häcken. I really enjoyed the match, though. I thought it was a very good spectacle and a good advert for Swedish football and also Dutch football. I was really impressed with AZ. They have some really exciting young players. I didn't expect them to do so well, I'll be honest, but they just had too much pace. They had an 18-year-old striker up front who I was very, very impressed with. It really just tore them apart. His name is Myron Boadu. I think he's some talent to watch in the future, and yeah, I think Rasmus Lindgren will be having nightmares about that player. There was one, the first goal, he just absolutely skinned him and finished left-footed. Yeah, Häcken started quite well, and it looked as if they maybe giving them a challenge. But really, the biggest problem with Häcken there was just the not signing of the non-registration of Alexander Yeremiev, their star player, their best striker. Well, maybe apart from Paulinho, but their sort of main number 9. They failed to register him as an administrative error, Steve. Can you believe it? And for that reason, they couldn't play him in either leg. And I really think that was very, very costly. They played a Ghanaian sort of rookie debutant, more or less, up front, Kazito, who'd only played sort of 27 minutes since he's joined Häcken. And he had his big chance, but he really looked out of his depth. And it was a big shame because I think with Yeremiev, maybe that would have been a little bit more of a chance for them, a bit better of a hold-up player. Someone who can bring players into the game, hold the ball up, good in the air. And I think players like Paulinho and Daleho Iran just missed the kind of player who could do that and just retain the ball. But, Häcken have got quite a small pitch, quite a compact stadium. And those AZ players up front really just were too strong and ran away with it 3-0 really in a completely deserved result.
Yeah, I think I messaged you at the weekend of this administrative error. That's a sacking offence, in my opinion, unless someone's been really unlucky along the way. But that's dire, isn't it? There's no excuses for that. And that could cost them hundreds of thousands of pounds. They probably would have got knocked out anyway, wouldn't they? But that's shocking. There's absolutely no excuse. He should be the first one on the team sheet, shouldn't he?
Well, it has cost them hundreds of thousands of pounds because if they had, been any sort of position to qualify, they would have needed him. And having got through the first leg 0-0, they could have really done with a player like him up front. But yeah, it was a shame and a sad way to go out. I'm not saying it would have influenced the result massively because AZ really did outclass them, especially the back line. I think they were just way too quick for the Allsvenskan players there. It was something they're not really used to playing against, I think, that speed. So, yeah, out they go. But, as you mentioned, gutting that AIK will not be playing Rosenborg, having been eliminated. But we do have some qualifiers this week coming up. And I don't know what games you'll be looking for. Maribor against Rosenborg is obviously the big one in terms of Champions League qualifying. And then on Thursday as well, we have a couple of other games. We've got Molde against Aris. Interesting there is that Daniel Sundgren, who was at AIK, could be part of that squad for the Greeks. Sheriff against AIK, who are still in Europe but dropped down into the Europa League. Haugesund PSV, which is a massive game. And Malmo against Sredinsky. So that's a couple of other games. And Norrköping as well. Don't forget Norrköping. They have Hapoel Beer Sheva from Israel.
Yeah, I've looked at Molde's draw. Aris, I have to say I don't know much about them, but they, by all accounts, they were lucky in the previous round against one of the Cypriot sides. It looks a favourable draw to me on paper. There's quite a few really good teams in this draw. Even Malmo have got a decent one, haven't they? Zurinsky, Mostar. That looks a winnable match. It's... Norrköping's match as well. I think that's a very winnable fixture. Things have gone quite favourable in this section, I would say. That's for sure. Apart from Haugesund, obviously, they'd do. If they beat PSV Eindhoven, it'd be one of the biggest shocks ever, wouldn't it? But you never know, do you, in football?
Well, 2013, I think, was the last time for a Swedish team in Häcken anyway, certainly for getting to the latter stages. They won't be there this time around. And Haugesund, I'm not entirely sure when the last time they made it this far was. Steve, I want to put you on the spot a little bit. Do you see any of the teams making it through to the group stages? They've done the draw today for the next round if teams qualify. Looking at it as it pans out, can you see any teams from Sweden or Norway getting to the holy grail of the group stage?
Well, let's start with Champions League. If Rosenborg get past Maribor, then they'll be facing Dynamo Zagreb or Ferencvaros. It's probably going to be Dynamo Zagreb, isn't it? that's no gimme. But even if they were to lose that, then they would be in the Europa League group stage automatically. So that's all Rosenborg have to do to get into a group stage. That's doable. Just beat Maribor. The rest of Molde have actually got. I looked at their the next round draw, and I think someone like Partizan Belgrade or Yeni Malatyaspor, who the fuck are they? And Partizan Belgrade. I mean, that's a. They're not what they were, are they? And then I don't know who the other teams from Sweden have got in the next round, but certainly I could see Molde making the group stage. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, from my point of view, I think team that looks best placed for me right now, I think Norrköping have a good chance actually against the Israeli team, Beersheva. Malmo you would think, have a good chance as well coming through. AIK Sheriff, I've lost a bit of faith in AIK based on the last round. I think they could have done better there, and this is a slightly easier game in terms of coefficient against the man who shot the Sheriff. But I still think it could be a difficult one from AIK, just given the way they tend to perform at times in Europe. But we shall see. Let's move on.
If AIK make it through, they'll face the loser of Celtic or Cluj in the next round. And if Norrköping make it through, they're probably going to end up facing Feyenoord. So, tricky.
Norrköping final would be one hell of a clash. I'd love to see that.
Yeah.
Seems like there's a bit of a sort of Scandinavia against Holland affair at the moment, isn't there?
But favourable for Malmo, if they win, then they will be facing Neftchi Baku or Bnei Yehuda, who are Israeli, by the way. I mean, that's a great chance for Malmo, isn't it?
Yeah, I believe one of them could get Apoel as well, isn't it? Because I read something saying that Linus Hellenius could play against one of the teams. But I'm not entirely sure which one, to be honest. So
these draws always do my head in, mate, to be honest with you. They just they're very complicated. There's a lot to do with seeding and coefficient. And I always get it wrong. Every time I tweet something about this, someone tweets me in the other direction. There's a lot.
Yeah, and I think one thing to say as well on that is it's slightly unfair, isn't it? At times when you see, teams that are champions of their actual leagues, having to face each other in third qualifying rounds and things like that. When you've got bigger teams who have finished fourth in their domestic league, just because it's a bigger league, getting a straightforward pathway to the group stages. But I guess money talks in the UEFA Champions League, doesn't it? Really, in Europa League to a certain extent, and it's not necessarily always about sporting merit.
No.
But let's move on. Transfer window is open in Norway, and there's already been a couple of deals, hasn't there, Steve? So take it away on some deals that have excited you, and we're going to start with Norway in this podcast. Really, we'll move on to talk about the league as well in general. But let's kick it off with the transfer window. What are you expecting from this window? Will there be a lot of movement, or are you expecting a slow one?
I'm expecting a lot of movement, actually, to be honest, John. I think there's going to be a lot of that. We actually had a question, didn't we? Just tonight. Quick question. Before his debut tomorrow, what can we expect from Frank Bolly in general at Ferencváros? Has he already reached his peak there, or is there more to come? And could Hungary be a stepping stone for him? Right, well, he's moved from Stabæk to Ferencváros. I don't know what the fee is here, so I may be doing him a slight disservice, but I actually think Frank Bolly's one of those players who is a bit overrated, unfortunately. He misses too many chances for my liking. There's no doubt there's some great skill and flair there, and he's a good physical player. However, he misses. He's clinical. He's not clinical enough in front of goal on a consistent basis, in my personal opinion. The amount of times he's gone through with a big chance, and you've got your head in your hands if you're back in Stabæk or on the overs, because you just don't know how he hasn't scored. He's not clinical enough. Whether or not he's going to get a glutton of chances for Ferencváros, I don't know. I'm guessing they're one of the best sides in their league. Who knows what the Hungarian league is like? Maybe such a poor level he can thrive there, but honestly, I think he's a bit of an overrated player, to be honest, John.
Well, I think from what I know about the Hungarian league, it's about on par with
right.
Norway and Sweden, is it not? Maybe
He
slightly
score
lower.
goals. He's probably one of them strikers who'll score quite a lot of goals for them. And at the end of the season, they're thinking he probably should have had double. You know what I mean?
Well, his stats show that he's scored 55 goals in 139 games as a striker anyway, and 61 goals in 157 games in total for Stabæk with 15 assists, which is a pretty good record, to be honest. Previously at Arlesons as well, where he had 7 goals in 29. But yeah, according to the Meat Man Soccer there, maybe not the most highest rated of players. Who else has caught your eye in this window so far, Steve?
Well, Stabæk have brought in a defensive midfielder, central midfielder called Total Manza from Omlanispor in Turkey. He actually played at Stabæk a couple of years ago and was very good. A strong engine in midfield for them. I think he'll go pretty well. What else so far? Well, Viking signed Benjamin Kalman from FC Inter in Finland, a striker that they're hoping will do well for them. Sarpsborg have signed 5 players already in this window, which is incredible. I mentioned them in the last podcast, but they've added a few more players since then. Although one of them, mate Males from Cluj, unfortunately, has already got injured. So they've been a glutton of injuries, Sarpsborg. They always get a lot of injuries. I think it's their artificial pitch. There's certain types of artificial pitch in the world which just have a knack of getting injured players on them. But anyway, they've been pretty active. Vålerenga obviously have lost Shadir Rajuka. They've signed a centre forward from FC Midtjylland today, Mayron George, who, I mean, I don't know much about him at all, to be honest. Maybe he'll be a useful player for them. They have been linked with a Philadelphia Union player called Corey Burke, who I wouldn't actually recommend they get him because he lives up to his surname, unfortunately. So I wouldn't really. If they're listening, if Vålerenga are listening, don't buy it. He won't do very well for you. But they have been strongly linked with a striker there.
Who's the number one player in the? You know, if you had to pick one transfer, the best transfer so far of the window, who would you pick?
Well, I still like Lenny Nongis to Sarpsborg. He didn't play at the weekend. I'm guessing because he's not ready yet. But I still think Lenny Nongis to Sarpsborg could be potentially. He's a risk. Don't get me wrong. He's a risky player, but he could really pay off because he's got a high skill level for this league. So that's the one that I like at the moment. I quite like Musa Ng, who's moved to Odd. The left winger there, he's replaced Sanders Svensson. He'll add a good bit of pace to them.
Okay, well, title challengers Odd, which we'll come on to shortly. I've reinforced there, as you mentioned. And, yeah, Sarpsborg, who bottom 2 of the leagues, battling relegation, so they really will need Lenny Nangis to step up. But we discussed him in the last podcast, so let's quickly move on. We have a question from, I think it's the artist formerly known as Ted Cruz Ate My Son, who has now popped up as at YouTube channel Pub Open. And he asks, which player will be leaving Rosenborg next? And where would you imagine him going to?
I think Nicholas Bentner will be leaving Rosenborg next. And I think he'll go to some sort of crap championship club in England. I would say that's possibly likely there from Rosenborg. The rest of the squad, off the top of my head, I'm not entirely sure, actually. I was going to say Paul-Andre Helland, but he actually came in with a brilliant performance in the last Champions League qualifying round, so he'd probably stay there now this season. But Bentner's going to end up somewhere. Not that he's been playing at all anyway. But I think apart from that, there are probably not going to be too many outs at Rosenborg at the moment.
They're doing quite well, haven't they? They've picked up since their early season slumbers.
They have picked up, and what's happened is the players have decided to perform. I said it at the start of the year. If me or you suddenly got put in charge of that squad, at some point the player that we would come good, because the simple fact is the core quality of the players in the squad is just too good. At some point these guys are gonna want to put themselves in the eye, especially in these European matches. It seems quite a lot of these players are wanting to perform and put themselves in the shop window because it's a really good way to attract the eye of potential buyers, isn't it? But everyone's really up for it in Europe, and they seem in a better phase, to be honest with you, to Rosenborg right now. Quite how much, I'm not going to start crediting the coach too much because I don't think he's had an awful lot to do with it. Certainly on the field, his tactics have stayed the same, and I think he needs to be rotating the squad a bit more. As a ridiculously low plane comes near my house. Bloody hell, I thought it was going to crash into my house then. Maybe behind the scenes in terms of his man management, I think that's probably improved, and it needed to.
Low-flying planes and low-flying champions of Norway there in Rosenborg, who are currently 6th in the table and will need to step it up. But they've recovered fairly well of late, so we'll keep an eye on them. Steve, I've got a couple of interesting bits of transfer tidbits before we move on to discussing the league. The first one that broke tonight is about Hakon Evjen. This is quite an interesting development because according to VG in Norway, the publication there, the newspaper, they've scouts from Manchester United and Manchester City were actually at the game tonight watching Hakon Evjen, the player that we've talked about quite often on this podcast, a very young, talented Norwegian under-20 international. The club have also admitted, according to VG, that they've confirmed these reports that City and United were watching him, and have said that they would be open to a sale if the price is right, and if not, that he could potentially be on his way to either Belgium or Holland. Steve, what do you make of this development? And just tell us a little bit more about Hakon Evjen, his season so far, maybe just for people who don't know much about him. Just tell us, listeners from England maybe who may not know him, for example, what kind of player is he, and a little bit more on that whole rumour.
Yes, well, Hakon Evjen, I mentioned this in the last podcast as well. He's a very he's an offensive player. Plays on the right wing at the moment for Bodø Glimt. He actually started his life as a right back, I do believe. So he actually
started his life.
He started his life in football as a right back, and so he actually has some decent defensive qualities in terms of pace, tracking back, positioning, timing a good tackle. He's not the most physically strong, I will say that, but in terms of going forward, he's got great balance. He knows how to pick a pass out. Got the eye for a spectacular goal, as we know before. He scored a couple of goals tonight, actually, against Strømsgodset. And, it's obvious that he's a top talent he's probably the hottest young talent property in Norwegian football right now. To be honest, the cupboard is fairly bare, unfortunately. But he does stand out like a sore thumb as being one of the very best talents out there in the Eliteserien at the moment. And I think Bodø Glimt know that. They know that then they're going to lose him in this window. So they're pretty much putting him up for sale. And they want to try and get as much money as they can for him. I'm sure they'd love a bidding war, wouldn't they, for this player? And if they play their cards right, they can probably get a few million for him. And along with a few extra future incentives. So, he's obviously a good player. He reminds me a bit of last year where I think clubs from 33 different clubs sent scouts to an Erling Braut Haaland game, didn't they, in the Europa League for Molde? And, all right, we're not at that level yet here, are we? But let's just say if Man United and Man City are looking out, then there'll be other clubs around Europe keeping their tabs on him, won't they?
Well, yeah, and I'm going to read you a couple of quotes from the Glimt trainer, Kjetil Knutsen, who said he's no stranger to the interest in Evjen. And when he was asked about the player's future, he said, it looked, from my point of view, I hope we can keep him for the season. And he was asked, is Manchester City the right step for him? And he said, it's a big step, but Manchester City are a club that likes to sign players for the long term. So I expect there'll be some intermediary steps before eventually going to City, maybe a loan. So it looks like he's kind of well briefed on the whole situation. And he said that we have to keep in mind he's a Bodø Glimt player, and he must keep that in mind too, trying to keep his head firmly on the ground, I guess, to a certain extent. But it looks as if he has encouraged the move in some of his comments as well. Steve, just on that one before we move on, you mentioned there about Haaland, Erling Braut Haaland. How would you compare Evian's potential ceiling to Braut Haaland's?
That's a really good question. I think Braut Haaland's got a higher ceiling but that's all to do with the position he plays in, and he's so strong. He's a beast. He's been described as a beast already at Salzburg, and that, you can tell why. For his age, he's so strong and tall and physical. Evian is it's a completely different position, so it's kind of hard to compare in a way. A lot will depend on his next club that he goes to. It's still a high ceiling, don't get me wrong. Man City would actually be a great move, I think, for him, and also for Buda Glimt, because I do know, for example, Manchester City bought a Columbus Crew keeper called Zach Steffen, who's actually the US #1 now. Anyway, they bought him, but they loaned him back to Columbus Crew for about, I think, another year, effectively. And that would be fantastic. If Buda Glimt could get him back on loan until the end of the year, they could finish in a medal spot this year for sure. Maybe even win the league. Who knows? But if he's sold to somewhere like Belgium, he's gonna be gone straight away, isn't he? And that's the end of it. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. But Man City kind of do this, don't they? They buy these players. They might not even play a single minute for Man City ever, but they end up making a good profit on them, don't they? It's just it's about the football business now, isn't it? Liverpool done exactly the same in recent years too.
Yeah, you're not wrong there. And just to wrap up on Hakan Evian, he's a 19-year-old player, and this season he has 6 goals and 3 assists in 14 appearances, which is pretty good for a teenager kind of just breaking through. And Buda Glimt, just to touch on them as well, having a fantastic season, as you just mentioned there. Second in their table, 4 points behind Molde with 2 games in hand. So they are definitely not out of this title race whatsoever. And let's move on to that title race now, Steve, because you wanted to touch on Molde, who are top of the table, but they've been kind of slipping a little bit of late, haven't they?
Yeah, and this match against Viking at the weekend, they won it 2-0. But it stood out in my mind at the end of the fixture, how important it could be in terms of the season as a whole. There was someone who was interacting, I think it was Joe Gold, reply. He said he caught the Molde match today, put it together in the end. That's championship winning stuff, and absolutely right. That's the sort of match that champions win. They rested players for the game. They rested Magnus Wolff-Eikrem, Lecky James. It was a risk. And the first half, there wasn't much in it. And then Viking actually had a period in the second half where they were really on top. And I thought, bloody hell, Viking are going to score here. And they had one chance which was cleared off the line just by a defender. I don't know how Molde kept that one out, to be honest with you. And it looked like it was heading towards a 0-0, but then they brought their super subs on, and both Lecky James and Magnus Wolff-Eikrem scored with about 10 or 15 minutes to go. And it was a kind of get out of jail, really. They didn't play very well. They didn't deserve the win, but they got the 3 points. And that's what champions do, isn't it?
It is indeed, and they are top of the table, looking good. And as you said, they're potential champions with Buda Glimt and Odd hanging on to their coattails. We'll be back after this short break. We're going to move on to Sweden in a minute, aren't we, Steve? So join us in the second half when we will be back to have a little chat about the latest goings on in the Allsvenskan.
Welcome back to the Nordic Football Podcast. I'm Steve Wiss. I'm joined by Jonathan Verdugba. In this section, we're going to be talking about Swedish football. So things are very interesting at the top of the Allsvenskan right now. Malmö didn't have a match, so it was a chance for the other teams to catch up on them, take advantage. And, Djurgården, they certainly did. Again, I mentioned in the last podcast how that defence of theirs seems to be really keeping them very strong. And another win to 0 for Djurgården, John.
Clean sheet, and they currently have arguably the best defender in the league in Marcus Danielsson, who we will talk about shortly. And yes, you're right there, Steve. It was another clean sheet for them, another solid defensive performance. I mean, it was against Elfsborg, who are not the strongest of teams, but they got the job done where others failed, and a few other teams have failed miserably this weekend, just to prove to you that this league is not easy to win, but also to prove to you that to win a league you need a solid defense and you need to be strong. I caught some of the game, and I must say I was quite impressed with Djurgården, just how solid they are defensively. Danielsson, as I mentioned, was really impressive. A few really good blocks and tackles, key moments of the match. And it's not only that, Steve, they played good football as well, and the goal was really, really well worked. Fantastic goal from Kevin Walker, who came on as a substitute because of an early change. But he scored a lovely goal. It was a really well-worked move involving about 5 or 6 players. Sort of 1 and 2 touch passing across the boxes and across the box and into the penalty area, and a good finish. Really well-grounded out win. One thing that was interesting to me at half-time as well, the manager of Djurgården was going mad at his players on the touchline, just really trying to rev them up before they went out for the second half. And it seemed to work because they scored just after half-time. It was 0-0 at half-time, and they came out and scored shortly after that. So a really big win for Djurgården, who got top of the league. They scored in the 50th minute. And I think that really does cement them now as potential title challengers. They are in this race with 12 games to go. They're 1 point clear of Malmö, 1 point clear of AIK, 5 points clear of Häcken in 4th. And I think they are potentially here to stay, Steve.
Yeah, top of the league, and everyone's played the same amount of games now. AIK obviously right up there as well. Häcken with a win, a 4-1 win to get them to 33 points. They're 5 adrift. Hammarby had a chance to move up to 34 points, but they bottled it, didn't they, the weekend? They were cruising against Kalmar and bottled it.
They did indeed. And I had a bit of a rant about this on the weekend on Twitter, and during the game, just watching the game, I was shocked at how they performed after going 2-0 up. I didn't expect that from them at all. But yeah, they were 2-0 up against Kalmar. They should have seen the game off. I mean, I know they were down to 10 men. Obviously, the keeper was sent off, and Kalmar did get a penalty to sort of get back 2-1, and then they came back. But really, a team that scored, as we mentioned, so many goals of late, 6 goals, 5 goals, 6 goals in recent weeks, 20 goals in the last 4 appearances. I was really surprised at how they just failed to see out the game, really. I expected them to win it. Kalmar are in really bad form. But yeah, I think the thing with Hammarby that separates them, and it just sums up that they're not going to win the title for me, really, the way they performed. I think they took their eye off the ball, that there was complaints, and they were complaining after the game saying that they were sort of hard done by. But I just don't buy that, I'm afraid, Steve. When you're 2-0 up in a game, even if you have 10 men, you see the game out. And I think they made some strange substitutions. They took off Tankovic when really they could have used him for the whole 90 minutes. And I was really disappointed with their performance, to be honest. I think you can safely say that for me, that was the kind of leaguey performance where you show that you're not going to win the league.
Yeah, they conceded 27 goals, Hammarby, which is a significant amount. And if you just look at the top 3, it's those 3 that got the best defensive records. I mean, obviously, not necessarily all of these top teams, DIF, Malmo and AIK, not necessarily the most flashy of sides. There's obviously some very good defenders in the ranks here. You mentioned one of them just now, Marcus Danielsson. I mean, would you say he's the best right now in the Allsvenskan, or are there others that can get close to him?
No, I'd say he's the best. I think at the moment he's just one player of the month in the Allsvenskan, and I think it's deservedly so. He's really been, since his move from Sundsvall, he's been absolutely fantastic, I'll be honest. He's just gone from strength to strength in that club, and is really, really impressed. In the game today, there was a player that we'll talk about shortly, who he was up against, a young player at Elfsborg, and he dealt with him well. But yeah, he's really been very impressive, I think, for them this season. He leads the line well. He's good in the air. Aerially he's good. He makes good interceptions. He's a strong player as well. He wins his defensive duels. And yeah, just an all-round really, really solid player. And I think it's fully deserved his Player of the Month award. Just quickly on the league itself in general, because there's some interesting stats regarding the clubs. I mean, Hammarby have scored 42 goals this season, which is 13 more than any other team. So they are flying in terms of goal scoring. Malmo next on 29, and Hammarby's XG is by far ahead of anyone else's. But it's where conceding goals has been their major problem. But I think one thing I wanted to touch on is the expected goals, because the expected goals against for Djurgården is the best in the league. They've only been expected to concede 15 goals at 15.36 XGA, which is the best expected goals against in the league. So that just shows you that they're really, really performing at that end of the pitch, and it's starting to show, isn't it? It's starting to really count. And one other one I wanted to point out, Steve, just before we move on, maybe to a wider discussion, Kalmar actually have the 4th best XG in the league, which is a big surprise considering they're near the bottom of the table. They're 14th. I was really shocked by that. They've got a better XG than Djurgården, in fact, as well. But yeah, Hammarby, Häcken, and Malmo have the top 3, with Kalmar in 4th. But Kalmar are let down by their defence and just obviously the inability to convert those chances. But yeah, some interesting stats there, Steve.
Very much on the interesting side. The Kalmar one, you certainly would not expect that, would you, at all? But clearly they can't finish their chances at all. So, yeah, it's always worth keeping an eye out for these stats. Well, must mention that this data is via Y-Scout, who we do have a collaboration with. And keep your eye out on that Y-Scout blog. We have done quite a few articles on it this year. It's very interesting stuff. So give it a read. Now, a couple of years ago, in the 10 players to watch, on your list was someone called Maroki Ndione. And he's caught your eye recently, hasn't he? He might be that this is his year to break out.
Yes, indeed. Maroki Ndione came up clutch with a massive goal in a recent game last weekend for Elfsborg, which really could actually save their season. They beat Kalmar with a late winner, which was quite a shock actually, because they've been in really bad form of late, Elfsborg, and there's been pressure on the manager. Their previous game before that was a 5-2 defeat to Hammarby, who absolutely battered them. They'd also lost 3-0 to AIK before that, and there was real pressure growing on the manager, Jimmy Tellin. But yeah, as you mentioned there, a player who I highlighted a while back, he was in my 10 to watch of 2018 season, having scouted him in a U tournament many years ago. And I really think this player is going to be a big player in the future, in a similar vein to Benjamin Nygren, Maroki Ndione. And he's a 19-year-old player, strong lad. He looks like a big fellow. And yeah, he took his goal brilliantly, really. It was a late winner. He's a 6'4" player, really, really good stature about him. Kind of maybe a bit like Demba Ba, if I had to compare him to someone. And yeah, he took his goal brilliantly, and he was the hero of that game. The Elfsborg fans ran onto the pitch. They were going mad. He ran into the stands. It was a really joyous moment for Elfsborg, who haven't really had a very particularly joyous season, really. There's not much to shout about. They haven't really done much. So it was a I think it was a really sort of cathartic win for them. It took them up to 9th as well. They're 9th in the table now, and it put Kalmar into the bottom 3, which is a real worry for Kalmar. But yeah, he's definitely one to watch, Maroki Ndione, and I'm a big fan of his. I think he will. And he started tonight's game against Djurgården on the back of that. And I actually thought he gave Danielsson a good game, and he came close once or twice with some instinctive attempts. So yeah, I think he's certainly one to watch in the Allsvenskan.
And it's very good to hear Elfsborg being discussed on the Nordic Football Podcast. There's usually more chance of seeing Lord Lucan, isn't there, than being mentioned on here. So nice bit of airtime for Elfsborg. Do we have any Elfsborg fans who listen to this podcast? If so, let us know, be in touch, because they're a club that don't usually get too much of a mention. But good to see a young player going well there for Elfsborg. And I mean, I just want to go back to those stats that you mentioned, John, because there's some cracking ones, really. There's so many in detail things. And, of course, stats aren't everything. But what else has been catching your eye in that department, would you say?
Yeah, there's a couple of ones that caught my eye, I think, in terms of teams. Just the general attacking ones, like I said. I think Kalmar stats in terms of the numbers, they produce a lot of shots as well. They've had 252 shots as well, which is the third highest in the league. So really that implies to you that Kalmar are actually creating a fair amount in terms of XG and shots created, but they're just not converting, which raises question marks about maybe some of their forward players. They've actually had more shots on target, more shots on goal in this league than Hammarby, who have scored way more goals. The top two in terms of shots has been Malmö and Häcken, and Malmö are really looking good in their attacking numbers in general, which could drop hints about how the season may end up going. And Häcken as well, you cannot ignore them. They've got the second highest XG in the league, just behind Hammarby. So, those three teams are the ones who maybe look like you might expect to do very, very well. But, as the saying goes, isn't it, Steve? Goals win games, but defenses win titles. And it's those numbers from Jurgen, which we mentioned, the expected goals against, which are really keeping them, where they are at the moment, which is top of the league with just such a low XG against. Häcken really struggle when it comes to XG against. They're fifth in the table. They have a massive dip there. Obviously, EFK are third, so their defense is actually performing much better compared to the other teams. But yeah, it's you can always gain a bit of information from the XG stats.
Is this a league where you have to really win it by defence rather than attack? Doesn't feel like the sort of division where you can just go out and outscore everyone, based on recent years anyway. It feels like you just need a really, really strong defence. I know you could say the same for most leagues, but especially this one, Hammarby prove it, don't they? They're scoring so many goals for fun, but they're still 6 points off the pace at the halfway stage.
Yeah, you're spot on. I was just going to use them as the example that kind of proves it, really. As you've mentioned there, they're blitz teams, but the Kalmar game just summed it up for me. You cannot be 2-0 up at a low. Kalmar was second bottom going into this game. So one of the worst teams in the league in terms of the actual points attained. Forget their XG and forget their shot numbers. They're one of the worst teams in the league when it comes to racking up points. You cannot go into a game like that, be 2-0 up. I really felt like if they'd have won that game, Hammarby, they would have given themselves a good shot at sort of putting pressure on AIK and Malmö at the top. But yeah, when you throw away a game like that, it just sums it up for me, really. You can score 42 goals all you want, but at the end of the day, I think in the Allsvenskan, it's the defence that will win you the title. Just look at AIK last season. They barely conceded any goals, and that just allows them to grind out results, kind of 1-0 here and there. And I think that is ultimately more important than kind of blitzing teams 6-1 in various games, because a lot of the games in the league are quite tight. And I think it's just the ability to, because there aren't many top-class strikers, as in genuinely, truly class, the ability to not concede ends up kind of outweighing the ability to score at times. So just going back to AZ as well, because, the player that I mentioned to you there, Myron Boadu, who against AZ, he's just on a completely different level to anything you get in Allsvenskan in terms of goal-scoring ability. If any team had a player like that who can just dribble past three players, and take them out of the game and score, it's a game changer. But no one really has that in Allsvenskan. No one has a really top class striker in that mould. So you need the ability to not concede and then to be able to grind out wins really in that way. So yeah, I do agree with you, and I think Hammarby are a good example there.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the table for the Allsvenskan in terms of goals over and under 2.5, and this is actually from a betting point of view, really. But all three of Malmö, Djurgården, and AIK are in the bottom five ranked. For most amount of under 2.5 games. In fact, the last 5 Djurgården matches have ended under 2.5, and average goals per game in AIK matches just 1.9, only 2.3 goals per game on average for Djurgården. Whereas at the other end of the scale, you've got Hammarby, 3.8 goals per game on average, which is a staggering amount in any league. Just backing them on the goals line, it must be printing money right now. And Örebro, their matches are surprisingly high scoring, John. 3.1 goals per game there. I don't know what's going on there. I always perceive them as quite a negative side for some reason. But they're scoring goals. Well, their matches are containing a lot of goals recently anyway. But, I mean, say Hammarby are facing AIK, Malmö, Djurgården. What's going to happen? Do Hammarby suck these teams into a shootout, or do the defensive teams win out and sort of suck them into a low scorer?
Well, yeah, just on Örebro there quickly. I think a lot of their goals are from Carlos Strandberg, whose XG is one of the best in the league. Actually, he's the 5th best player in the league in terms of XG. So he's really been responsible for many of their goals and their chances in the league this season. A really inspired loan signing, I think. Without him, they'd have been in real trouble. To answer your question, well, Hammarby, like I've said, I worry about them just in terms of how they're going to be able to stop leaking goals. Obviously, they had Kosanu at the beginning of the season for 5 or 6 games, didn't they? But they didn't, they didn't manage to keep him. He went to Bruges. They just haven't quite, they've lost quite a lot of defensive players in the last year or so. They had some players last season who were key, and they've gone as well. If we look at their upcoming games, I think they've got some tough games coming up. But when you've had a run, they've had a fairly kind run, as I mentioned on the last podcast. Teams like Kalmar, you just have to be beaten if you want to win the title, I'm afraid. And they haven't done that. Their next game is against Helsingborg, which will be a test. But I think, for all their ability to score goals, you have to not concede. I think one thing just to say quickly on that as well, I mean, Muamer Tankovic has been such a massive part of it. 10 goals now, 7 assists. He's blitzed his career record in terms of the Allsvenskan. Can they keep hold of him? That's another big question, because Jordan Larsson, the top league goal scorers, left. He's got 11 goals. And it looks like, as we've mentioned there's a few others who may be off. So maybe Tankovic might be the next one now, because he's really raising eyebrows.
Yeah, definitely. And, well, let's just move to the bottom of the table briefly. And there's a few teams picking up results suddenly, John. It's not very pretty down there, but, Sundsvall are struggling, like we said. They didn't have a game this week. And Kalmar are struggling, but maybe that 2-2 draw against Hammarby, they can kick on from that, I don't know. But Falkenberg are doing quite well. They drew with Helsingborg. And AFC Eskilstuna have had a couple of wins recently. They beat Kalmar on the 13th of July. Did lose a couple of games then, but they've come up with a real bolt from the blue. Their first away win of the season at Östersunds the weekend. I had this one down as a comfortable home win myself. What's going on there?
Yeah, and they really owe the return of Adi Nalic, the young loanee from Malmö. He's really had a fantastic season. He's been out injured for a while, but he was really key at the beginning of the season for them in some games, and he's been key in his return with 2 goals to win them that game. I must say, Steve, I didn't expect that one. Like you said, it was a massive result for AFC Eskilstuna, because I thought they were close to dead and buried, really, and you would not have expected them to win this game. I think it's summed up by the fact that I captained Dino Islamovic in my fantasy team, which pretty much sums up my season to date on that. But a massive win for AFC. They go up to 15th now, obviously, still in the relegation zone, but 3 points clear of Sundsvall, who were rock bottom. A really, really big win. And I just want to point out on Östersunds, the numbers for them, we talked about stats at the moment, the numbers for them are not looking fantastic. In terms of XG, they are the lowest team in the league in terms of XG, so they're bottom of the table when it comes to expected goals. Whether you buy the stats or not, that is just a simple fact. And when it comes to XG against as well, they're not the best. They're in the bottom 3 for that as well. So that is pretty worrying for Östersund. Despite that, you would have still expected them to have the quality to beat Eskilstuna, who have the second worst XG against in the league. The table's pretty much similar to the XG against in that sense. Sundsvall have been expected to concede the most amount of goals, and they have in terms of the XG numbers. And AFC Eskilstuna are second worst. But yeah, Östersund were not expected to lose that game, and they're not really creating much. And AFC Eskilstuna as well, they're third bottom when it comes to XG, but Adi Nalic is a really, really clutch player for them. And if he can stay fit for the rest of the season, the youngster, I think they have small chance maybe of possibly avoiding relegation. I think a lot will depend on Falkenberg, because I think Kalmar will get out of it. They have the battling qualities that I think they showed on the weekend that prove that they can avoid the drop. So I think it's between Falkenberg, AFC and GIF at this moment in time for those bottom three places. Maybe Helsingborg, and it's serious, but yeah, worrying times for Östersunds, who are just maybe getting sucked towards the lower end of the table there in 10th.
I mean, looking at Östersund's results, because this isn't the first time they failed at home against the so-called poorer teams. They only drew against Elfsborg at home. They lost against Örebro at home when Örebro were in really poor form. They only drew against Sundsvall at home, and they obviously lost to AFC Eskilstuna. Do they have a problem against the poorer teams at home? It seems to me like Östersunds like it more as an underdog themselves.
Yeah, I think that's a fair comment there, Steve. I think a lot of it is to do with the fact that they don't really, we just talked about the importance of goal scoring. They don't really score many goals. I think Islamovic hasn't really, although he's a highly rated player in terms of club watching him, he's not racked up a huge amount of goals. And I think they just lack that ability to reliably score 2-3 goals in a game and see teams off. They've got a lot of nice sort of skillful technical players like Hossam Aish, for example. But, when it comes to it, they lack a bit of bite. And I think, as I mentioned on the last show, Saman Ghoddos is a huge loss for them. And it would be hard to replace some of the players they've lost in the last year, just simply because they've lost so many good players, and it's hard to keep that momentum. So I don't think it's a necessarily negative thing for Östersunds. It's just a reality. But, yeah, they just tend to be struggling in those sort of games. Sirius, I think as well, they drew, when they were sort of looking comfortable and then conceded a goal from the penalty spot, and just struggling to see off those sort of teams really, when you would expect them to win.
Yeah, well, I think that pretty much is a wrap for this episode now, John. We're running out of time. Just before we go, I just want to answer a question that someone asked me from NK Osijek Football News Croatian account. Prediction for Rosenborg against Maribor. I think Rosenborg are going to go through on aggregate. I don't know what the first leg's going to happen over in Maribor. Maybe they might lose that one 2-1 or something, or maybe a draw. But I'm fairly sure from what I saw of Maribor against AIK that Rosenborg got enough quality to beat them. I thought Maribor were very lucky to get past AIK, to be honest with you. Just a physical unit. As long as they deal with the physicality of Maribor, Rosenborg will make it through on aggregate, in my opinion.
Lovely stuff, Steve. And from two teams who have bottled it in Sweden this weekend, IFK Göteborg and Hammarby, we're now off to bottle up some milk and drink to the end of this show, or maybe something stronger, and drink to the teams in the Europa League this week and Champions League. So good luck to all teams, especially Haugesund, who, as I've mentioned, I have a soft spot for, and I really wish them luck against PSV, which is probably, for me, the tie of the round in our leagues, and I'll be keeping a very close eye on that one. I'm sure you will too, Steve.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, good luck to all the teams in Europe, and we'll see you for another episode very soon, John. So goodbye to everyone.
Yeah, and don't forget, before we go, you can follow us on Twitter at Nordic Footpod, and on Facebook you can give us a like, Nordic Football Podcast. So please do like and subscribe, or give us a rating if you so please on iTunes. Those are the kind of things that keep us going. And we're also on Patreon, patreon.com/Nordic Football Podcast, if you want to help us out with our special shows every week. So thanks a lot for listening, and goodbye.